The velvet drapes parted with an almost ceremonial elegance, revealing the softly glowing interior of Lraine. Golden sconces lined the walls, casting a warm, inviting light across the polished mahogany floors. Every detail, the hand-blown glass chandeliers, the meticulously pressed linens, the subtle classical strings drifting from concealed speakers, shouted of exclusivity. Julian Hart strode in, each step confident and measured, as though he owned the very air he moved through. His crisp white jacket looked almost luminous under the glow, the silver cufflinks gleaming every time his hand adjusted the tie at his throat. His hair was parted with painstaking precision, each strand immaculately in place. Beside him, Celeste Duval moved with a quiet grace. Once photographed on magazine covers as a model of rare beauty, she now lent her name and face to a growing roster of luxury brands. Tonight, she glittered in a deep purple gown, the fabric catching the light in a way that made every curve glow. Julian paused just inside the entrance. He was accustomed to cameras paparazzi flashing incessantly at gala events or hushed microphones at tech conferences. The tabloids had crowned him Tech Empire Titan for his uncanny knack of turning startups into billion-dollar ventures. He'd added $20 million more to his net worth only weeks ago, following a high-profile merger that dominated every business newsletter in the country. He was used to adoration and envy in equal measure. Yet tonight, as he scanned the room, his breath caught. His chest tightened. Something in the motion behind a curtained doorway seized him completely. Unseen by most guests, beyond the shimmering partition, a waitress moved with deliberate care between tables. She wore the standard uniform of Lraine, a tan apron draped over a faded black t-shirt and form-fitting black pants, but the fabric stretched against her body in a way that bespoke the undeniable proof of new life within her. Her hair was tied back in a plain bun, drawing attention to the pale curve of her neckline. Every step seemed both confident and wrought with fatigue, her shoulders carrying the weight of exhaustion and anticipation. Julian's eyes widened. He blinked, as though to clear his vision. The woman was familiar, achingly so. His heart twisted. "What is it?" Celeste's voice cut through his reverie. She followed his gaze and frowned in confusion. "Who is she?" He found himself unable to speak. His throat tightened and he shook his head, hoping this was a hallucination. But there she was, navigating the tables with professional ease, though her face was distant, absorbed in an inner world that seemed far removed from the glittering room. 9 months ago, in a modest one-bedroom apartment above the hum of the city, he and Vanessa had shared a quiet evening. He'd just closed his largest investment deal to date and had floated in late, burdened with the gravity of success. Dinner simmered on the stove, the savory scent of garlic and herbs lingering in the tiny space. She'd waited at the table, lit only by a single lamp, for 4 hours before the echo of his key in the lock stirred her agony. "Are we still in this together?" she'd asked, voice soft but brimming with hope. Julian had not looked up from his phone. "I can't be a husband right now," he'd said, his voice edged with impatience. "I need to focus, no distractions." Distractions. She had choked on the word. When she reminded him that she was his wife, his expression had hardened. He hadn't spoken again, turning away as though the space between them could be made infinite by silence alone. He left that night, leaving her to the empty apartment bright with unspoken promises. She discovered she was pregnant the following morning, alone, grasping a tiny stick that confirmed what her heart both dreaded and yearned for. She had no desire for his money, for the pity it would purchase. Instead, she wanted something more elusive, her dignity intact, her pride unsoiled by charity. That determination had carried her through months of scraping by. She moved into a women's shelter briefly, then borrowed couches and corners. Underpaid temp jobs at greengrocers, mailrooms, odd gigs in retail kept her just afloat. When her pregnancy became impossible to hide, she sought more stable employment. Now, 9 months on, she stood in line at Lraine's service entrance with a dozen hopefuls. She'd arrived in her only clean blouse, bruised around the collar from late nights. Her hair, once carefully styled, was drawn back in a simple knot. The manager, the one with the crisp shirt and the disinterested gaze, scanned her resume. Front-of-house experience, event coordination, hostessing at a college bistro. He raised an eyebrow. Why here? Her hands settled on her belly involuntarily, the new life inside her a constant presence. Because, she said, voice steady, this child deserves more than my fears. I'll scrub floors if necessary. A trial night turned into 3, and 3 into a permanent role. She learned the dance of wine service, the etiquette of caviar spoons, and the expected deference to wealthy patrons. She found moments of grace, small smiles from regulars, generous tips when she bantered politely about the vintage or the view. Each dollar slipped into her pocketbook or folded into envelopes labeled diapers, crib, and future. Now, as she placed a plate of seared foie gras before a pair of elderly patrons, Julian's gaze locked onto the gentle swell of her belly. His heart pounded, each beat the tolling of a distant bell. The color drained from his face. Celeste, noting his pallor, leaned closer. Seriously, who is she? He could not find words. Vanessa lifted the menu from her apron pocket and glided on, leaving a whisper of distaste from an impatient customer in her wake. Julian's world tilted. Moments later, as Vanessa threaded a tray of crystal water glasses across the room, she collided with a passing waiter. The tray tipped and the glass spun in air before smashing into 1,000 fragments at Julian's feet. Gasps echoed through the dining room as the patron chairs scraped back. Vanessa's face paled. She crouched, collecting shards with trembling fingers. Each flick of a broken piece seemed a mortal insult to her pride. Julian, forgetting the hush of fine dining etiquette, rose in an instant and knelt beside her, hand outstretched. "Stop," he murmured. "You'll cut yourself." She paused, her breathing quick, chest rising and falling beneath her uniform. She looked up, eyes wide with panic and mortification. "Don't make a scene," she whispered. His fingers closed over her wrist, warm and steady. His gaze held hers, gentle, haunted, regretful. "Vanessa," he whispered, as though saying her name aloud might shatter the spell. She jerked slightly, pulling free. "Don't," she said, cheeks burning. She rose to her feet, dusted the shattered glass from her apron, and retreated into the safety of the kitchen, where the sound of the steel pots seemed almost comforting. The dining room remained frozen, every eye darting between the broken fragments and the man in white kneeling amid them. Celeste rose from her seat, annoyance flickering across her features. "What the hell?" she hissed. But Julian could not speak. His mind replayed the moment he had missed, the steps he had never taken back. Vanessa, carrying a life he did not know existed, had always been more than a distraction. She had been his anchor. He stood and returned to the table where Celeste sat stiffly, her glare slicing through him. He sank into his chair, the crisp linens chafing at his skin. The polished champagne bucket at his elbow seemed grotesque, the cool silver mocking his inner turmoil. Silver candles flickered, shadows dancing across the table, playing specters of possibility and regret. Meanwhile, back in the kitchen, Vanessa bent over the sink. She rinsed her fingers under cold water, wincing at a shallow nick. One of the sous chefs paused, a gentle inquiry in his eyes. "You okay?" he asked softly. She straightened, pressing a paper towel to her finger. "I'm fine," she lied. Her voice was steady, but she trembled inside. Every inch of her body ached, not from the cut, but from the memory of his eyes on her, from the shock of seeing him there. He asked if the baby. Her voice broke, unspoken words tumbling in her throat. The chef placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. "Doesn't matter," she managed. "Doesn't matter anymore." She squashed her emotions and returned to her duties. Patrons awaited, orders stacked on service trays. She slipped back into the rhythm she knew by heart.